Well, hello again, guys, from here inside my front room in Gosforth. This is what post-transfer windows look like for journalists. Short, t-shirt and unshaven. But yeah, this is real. I haven't tried to put a shine on anything this summer. So here we are. And what else is real is that Alexander Isak is finally a Liverpool player. 39 days after I first broke that story that he had told Newcastle United he wanted to go. 39 days of coverage around the clock and around the world later, here we are. So I thought I'd check in one final time on Isak. And the question I want to explore today is Alexander Isak a Liverpool saint or a Newcastle sinner? Now I say this because I was sat through in the kitchen there last night. My wife came down at around 10, half 10 from putting the kids to bed. Yet another bedtime that Dad missed. And she said to me, "What do you think of it all? Now it's done." And I had a picture of Alexander Isak on my screen in a Liverpool shirt. And honestly, guys, not much bothers me. It really doesn't. I'm pretty thick-skinned in that regard. An upshot of being a journalist, and it's probably not a bad place to be. But I said to my wife, "No, there's something about that image that does unsettle me. That just doesn't sit right at all." And we spoke about it after that. Listen, she's never normally bothered about anything I do work-wise or to do with football, but we did explore it. And I suppose what she got out of me in the end was that I am conflicted, and by covering this story and trying to be fair right down the middle to Newcastle, to Liverpool, to Isak, I have exposed myself to both sides of the story. And I said to her, I can go in the living room now, which I've done 12 hours later, and I could sit there and make a video or write an article for Daily Mail Sport that would totally understand Isak's perspective, and from his jumping off point where he started from at the start of this saga to where he wanted to get to. And I could apply sympathy and understanding to that. I could also go in there and do a video attacking the guy and his conduct and the way in which he's behaved and the disrespect he's shown for Newcastle. So I suppose what it proves, in summary, is that there are two sides to every story. And in this video now, I'm going to present both of those arguments, as I suggested to my wife I might do last night. I'm going to start with the second of those arguments, that Alexander Isak is that three-letter rodent that some Newcastle fans have attached to him. And I get that. I understand that. Absolutely, I do. And I think part of the motivation for myself is that I do have children who are Newcastle United supporters. I do have children who have got Isak on the back of their shirts. I've got an image, and I posted this on my social pages post-cup final, where my wife and two of my boys FaceTimed me right on full time. Now, I was in the press box working to deadline. Ordinarily, I would never answer that call, but I took it, and I took a screen grab as well. And two of my boys were crying, and they were crying with joy, relief, celebration, emotion, ecstasy, everything there. And wow, was I so grateful that I took that call just to see what Newcastle United had done to them, to see what football had done to them, to see what live sport had done to them. You can attach that to any team, whether they're playing black and white or red and white or whatever. It was just the power of family and community and football and everything about it. And Alexander Isak played a massive part in that. One of the boys that day, he had Isak on the back of his shirt. If I look at it through the prism of my children and my friends, all you guys who are watching, who I do have a good relationship with and do understand. For Isak to have scored the second goal that day, and for him to be a player who'd been such an integral and much loved part of that journey to the point of lifting the cup, the first domestic trophy, for the first time in 70 years, I get the affection and the love you felt for him. And I see that through my children as well. And I felt it in that moment. So for them to go to bed last night and then wake up this morning to the picture of Isak in the Liverpool shirt, and to be told that he has gone to a Premier League rival, and he's done it without even the faintest suggestion or nod to those supporters I've just spoken about. That is what wrangled with me, really. And that's just as a journalist and as a football fan, someone looking in on a player who was so loved and so cared for and so cherished, and at the end of it all has shown absolutely zero love or care for those who gave that to him. Myself and my wife watched the video, the unveiling video at Liverpool, and it was cold. We both agreed on that word. It was so cold. And I was disappointed in that, because Isak is a character I don't know necessarily well. I've interviewed him once or twice and been around him. He seems super cool. I've always thought he was a nice guy with a dry sense of humour. I'm not going to go away from that, and I'll get to that in the second part of this argument. But come on, you're 25-year-old. I know you've been badly advised this summer, and a lot of it has been motivated by instruction from your agent, who in turn has been given the encouragement from Liverpool and the promise that the first offer, the second offer, the deal would happen. Again, I'm gonna get to that. But you're 25 years old. You are old enough and big enough to know the love and the care you've been given up here at Newcastle United by those on the outside of the club and by those on the inside. So from the point of departure, to not even give a nod to that in a closing statement, in the statement 2 weeks ago, or in any subsequent unveiling videos, I just think smacks of disrespect. Now, a quick insert, guys, from you here in the kitchen. Alexander Isak has just released a statement in which he does thank fans and teammates and staff, but my point and everything I say in this video stands. It's too little, too late. I don't change a word of what I've said. Now, Alexander Isak's agent, Vlado Lemic, has just given a quick, brief statement to a radio station there, in which it seemed to me like a parting shot at Newcastle, being glad to not be with those you were with previously. Now, come on. Alexander Isak joined Newcastle United as a 22-year-old who had just scored less than 10 goals in La Liga for Real Sociedad. They identified his talent. Yes, a lot of credit goes to Isak himself and all of the coaches and AIK and every previous club for everything that went into getting him to that point. But Newcastle identified that potential in him. Newcastle invested a club record £63 million. On the back of that, they invested time. Goodness, if you're a professional footballer and you want to take your talent and your skills to the next level and then the level above, you come and work here under Eddie Howe and Jason Tindall and Graham Jones, Stephen Purchase, the other coaches there. They will take you to the next level. They have taken Dan Burn. Dan Burn signed as a near 30-year-old. He hasn't just gone to the next level, he's gone to 4 levels beyond he would ever dream of playing at and being an England international. Tino Livramento, Anthony Gordon, Bruno Gomes, the list goes on. And Alexander Isak is another one of those who has gone to a player who scores 27 goals in a season. One of the best, most coveted strikers in the world. That is a two-way street. It takes something from the player, but it also takes a hell of a lot from the environment around you. So for him to not only give no nod to that at any point during the summer, but for also, by means of his statement 2 weeks ago, to put the manager under the wheels of a bus, which he did. It's quite telling they haven't spoken since. A lot of his teammates haven't spoken to him since. When Alexander Isak went, there were 1 or 2 who come out in support or certainly with farewell messages on social media. That's fine, that's fair enough. That is their want. I'm not going to pass any comment or judgment on that, but I thought it was more telling by the volume who didn't. And that is because what he's done to the club this summer, there could have been a different way. I'll explore in the second part of this video why maybe there couldn't have been a different way. But for now, and I've said this throughout the summer, I don't think Newcastle United are tone deaf. I think fundamentally when it comes back to it, the people on the inside, led by the guy at the top, Eddie Howe, and he's the guy at the top. There's an absolute vacuum of leadership above that right now. No sporting director, no CEO. Eddie Howe's name has been above the door this summer to an extent. I don't want to place too much on him for anything that may not have worked this summer, but you get the point I'm making there. Eddie Howe is the figurehead. He's the one who was fronted up. And he's fundamentally a decent person, and so are the guys around him. So when Alexander Isak did go to him at the back end of last season, he listened. Newcastle listened. That's why they explored the deals for João Pedro, Hugo Ekitike, Benjamin Sesko, and in the end, Nick Voltemade there. They did listen to his want. It could have been different. He could have carried on conducting himself like others did, like Eberechi Eze and Mark Guy, the 2 at Crystal Palace. He could have carried on playing. He could have carried on honouring the badge. I think still Newcastle would have listened to his want and his desire and those wishes that weren't without reason. And again, we're going to get to that very shortly. But he didn't. He showed 2 fingers to all of that. And his actions and his behaviour and his decision to go on strike behind a picket line and not cross the white line have cost his teammates, the teammates who helped him. It cost them 7 points, undoubtedly. With Alexander Isak in the team, Newcastle have played well enough to take maximum points out the first 3 games. That is on him. So for me, yes, Alexander Isak has disrespected Newcastle by his conduct from the moment he went on strike, when he didn't play at Celtic, when he didn't get on the plane to the Far East, when he then went to San Sebastian without telling his manager where he was going or what he was doing, when Eddie Howe found out about it through us guys in the press. That is disrespect. That is 2 fingers, to come back to that phrase. And that has been felt on the inside. The subsequent statement then, when, for me, and again, I've been pretty fair down the middle. I don't say anything on these videos that I don't believe to be true. At no point did Eddie Howe promise him he could leave the club this summer. Yes, the move would be explored, which was exactly what they did. Now, if Alexander Isak had ended up staying at Newcastle for whatever reason, what the club could absolutely point to him is, we've tried to facilitate his sale. We have listened. And all the while, we haven't chucked any grenades in your direction. The club have been incredibly respectful towards him. Goodness, think of what some former managers would have done in this scenario. They would have absolutely taken aim for Alexander Isak. Eddie Howe hasn't. And Isak has repaid him by behaving the way he's done and saying what he did in that statement. And then when he comes to go, no mention at all for those supporters who displayed the banner, Alex the Great. All that support and that love and the Swedish flag in mosaics across the Gallagher end. Come on, you've got to be classier than that. You've got to be a better human being. There was another way. And Alexander Isak chose not to pursue that. And that is why when I saw him sat there in the Liverpool shirt, I thought, wow, that just does not sit right at all. Just goes to show your little boys up in bed there, fast asleep, with Isak shirts on the rail. They can invest what they want in these players. Do they care? Do they give an F? Absolutely not. It comes back to them. They're selfish individuals who are just passing through. And that is what Alexander Isak has been this summer. And there rests the case for argument 1. Now, in response, the case in defence of Alexander Isak. And guys, I don't not believe this. I genuinely do. So first, let's just revisit Alexander Isak's reasons for wanting to leave Newcastle. And I believe there were twofold. There's the financial motivation behind it, and then there's the sporting side of it. Now, first of all, financial. And we've got to go back to March 24 for this, when Amanda Staveley and Mirgad Dudusi were still at the club. Now, they recognised that Alexander Isak, given his development and what he was contributing to the team, was worth a new contract in terms of what he was paid. They also foresaw a summer like this perhaps playing out down the line and thought it was best to tie him down to secure his future. And all my information is that Alexander Isak was willing to do that. So in March 24, there was a soft promise the contract talks would be revisited in the summer, and that Alexander Isak's pay deficit still tremendously well paid compared to the likes of you, me, the layman on the street, even the majority of footballers. But there was certainly scope to improve his wage in terms of what he could get elsewhere on an open market. And Staveley and Dudusi recognised that. Staveley and Dudusi, in late June, I think it was, then left the club against their wishes. And they were replaced by a new management structure with Paul Mitchell as the sporting director at the head of it, and chief executive Darren Eales. Now, Paul Mitchell, one of the first things he did, and again, this wasn't without reason, Paul Mitchell looked at Alexander Isak's contract, which had 4 years to run, very well paid, without a release clause, and said, we've just come out of a PSR nightmare, trauma. We don't have to discuss a new deal with you. No, you're not getting it. You can sit and wait for another year at least. Now, accountancy-wise, PSR-wise, it's probably a smart decision. What it didn't account for, and I've said this many times, is the human being and the world-class footballer on the end of it, who was absolutely furious, paid off, whatever word it is you want. Him and his camp felt disrespected and let down in that moment. It all kicked off, guys. Last summer was, it was turbulent to say the least inside Newcastle because of this incident. And that is why going into last season, Eddie Howe was having to put out fires all over the place. Not just with Alexander Isak, there were one or two others as well. The arrival of Paul Mitchell had, there's plenty of articles out there I've written if you want to explore the impact and the fallout of that. But Alexander Isak was a key part of that. And that is why he played the way he did in the opening 7 games. 1 goal. Eddie had to get him back in, pulled him into his office, and he got him on side. And it was a miracle, really, the way it played out as it did. climaxing in Wembley, the celebration on the town moor, Alexander Isak, 27 goals back in the Champions League, but that was coming out of last summer. And for a year, Alexander Isak in his camp looked at what was probably £100,000 a week below where they thought they were going to be if they'd signed that new deal at Newcastle in the summer of 24 as they wanted to. And because of that, there was a level of resentment. Now, I understand that if your employer has given you a soft promise, we'll call it, of a pay rise, and all of a sudden that is taken away by somebody, you are going to feel a level of resentment, especially in the manner in which that message, that no, was delivered. And I've got reason to believe it wasn't really in a softly, come on, you've got to understand where we're coming from. It was just a flat out no, you're not getting a deal. And because of that, I understand why Alexander Isak and his camp, they did have that reaction. Now, coupled with all of this, there were sporting motivations. When Alexander Isak joined, there was talk of a new training ground, there was talk of a new stadium. Now, nobody expects them to throw up a stadium overnight, absolutely not. But the training ground, there could and should have been more progress on that. So you looked at infrastructural issues, and he and others, it's not just Alexander Isak, did not believe the project was heading in the direction at which they thought it would, and with the speed at which they thought it would. And a lot of that comes back to PIF as well. I used the phrase before there with Eddie Howe's name above the door this summer. It's ultimately not. It's PIF's name above the door. And they've been absent owners to a degree in recent years. Yeah, it probably does extend beyond a year now. Where we arrived at this summer with no CEO, no sporting director, 3 transfer windows previous without a signing, that comes back to the owners. And there has been a disconnect. There has been, and I've written about this so many times, guys, trust me on this, there's been a disconnect inside the club, 2 clubs within a club. The training ground, Eddie Howe and his players and the job they do, and then everything else from a hierarchical executive C-suite boardroom level, there has been a split. And the week before the cup final, no one from the hierarchy come to visit those at the training ground. They're amazed. Were they bothered? Probably not that bothered. I think they'd be more relieved, that they didn't turn up, but there is a split there. Well, there was at least. I know there's been efforts to redress that and bring things back together this summer, and hopefully with the appointment of a sporting director and a CEO, that will come about. But we're getting sidetracked. Alexander Isak and others saw that. He looked at the project and thought, I'm a player now, a 25-year-old, who is good enough to be playing at the very, very top, not just to be playing in the Champions League, to win in the Champions League. I'm in a club who haven't signed a player in 3 windows. I'm in a club who on the first day of pre-season we've returned and there's no new signing through the door. Yeah, I want to go now. I've given them 3 great years. Yes, they've given me a lot, but I've given a hell of a lot back in return. And it's time to move on now. I understand that. A career is short, a career is fleeting, it's brief for any reason. It can be over, it can be derailed, be that because of personal circumstance such as an injury, or being stuck at a club like what Isak thought was Newcastle, who weren't able to compete to the level he wanted to be at. He doesn't want to be scraping at the Champions League on the final day of the season. He wants to be winning the league. He doesn't want to be going out with a hard line story because of a refereeing decision on the final day of a Champions League group stage. He wants to be booking his place in the knockout stages, then going out to win it. That's fair enough, guys. It really is. Now, you might not think that I feel that as Newcastle fans, but come on, apply it to your walk of life, your profession, whatever it is you do. And if you've got that chance to better yourself, you undoubtedly want to. I've got no issue with that. And I know teammates didn't either because they probably harboured a lot of the same feelings themselves. Now, some of them weren't or aren't good enough to move on. And because of that, they are absolutely happy to be at Newcastle. Others maybe are good enough to stretch themselves and extend themselves, but they know what they've got with Eddie Howe and the supporters and the potential, and they want to be part of that. Bruno Guimaraes, Joe Linton, Anthony Gordon now, who we think, this summer's had a reset and really come back into the building and back on side, if only he hadn't been sent off last week, perhaps trying too hard in defence of him. So the players understand that, and I do too. So there were sporting motivations, there were financial motivations. He didn't want to discuss or consider the new contract. That bridge was burnt this summer, especially not when he did have the promise and the prospect of going to Liverpool. And Liverpool is a big, brilliant football club, not dissimilar to Newcastle in many ways. If you look at the makeup of the guys who support it and the traditions there, I've always felt that and I've always thought that. Now, get distracted with a totally different argument, a different video as to how the two clubs have conducted themselves. But again, there was a means to an end for Liverpool. There was a means to an end for Alexander Isak this summer. Now, I said in the first part of this video, there was a different way. Now, if Alexander Isak had conducted himself differently, he and his camp, and perhaps even Liverpool, would have taken the view that there wouldn't have been the need for Newcastle to sell. There wouldn't have been that willingness, that openness to explore the sale, as the club's statement revealed, that conditions of sale. And if Isak had continued playing and conducting himself in a more professional manner, should we say, and playing and scoring goals and helping them win games, Newcastle might not have felt as if they had that gun to their head, for want of a better phrase, to sell him. So I get that. Is that not now just an upshot of modern football for Alexander Isak to get that move he wanted? He had to do what he had to do. Maybe he did. Look at Mark Gay, who didn't get his move to Liverpool. He'd conducted himself in a different way and didn't end up at Anfield. Alexander Isak did. So if this summer has taught us anything, it's that contracts between clubs and players absolutely need to be revisited for everyone now to contain a release clause. You know, professional football does prenups. I think we need that going forward to avoid scenarios like this where clubs, supporters, staff, players are dragged through this. And because there is so much money in it now, and I had this conversation with a footballer the other day, you know, clubs owe players nothing and players owe clubs nothing. They all want what is best for them at the end of the day. It's ruthless. And I can sit here and I can make an argument for, which I am actually physically doing. It's not theoretical now. I am making that argument that Alexander Isak did what he had to do. Liverpool did what they had to do. But Newcastle have got every right to feel aggrieved and as if they were played and as if they were disrespected and on the wrong end of behaviour that did cross the line of immorality with regards their Premier League rivals and with regards their player who had signed that contract and should have gone about it entirely differently. But Alexander Isak got what he wanted, so did Liverpool. Newcastle in the end negotiated a fee that was fair. And a degree of relief that they have got rid of somebody who didn't want to be there and made that plainly clear. And Newcastle wanted it to be different. They wanted it to play out in a different way. They wanted him to realise that there was a future here for him. That's why they went to his house at Darris Hall last week. But he was sticking to the strategy, to the predetermined game plan. That was why he's a Liverpool player. I understand why he wanted that move. But in summary, the way he's gone about it has left a massively, massively sour taste. And I'm disappointed in him. I really am, because I see what you guys as Newcastle fans have invested in him. I see what my own children have invested in him. I see what Eddie Howe and his teammates have invested in him. And he has got no recognition for that whatsoever. So that is why to see him sat there in the Liverpool shirt did leave me feeling uneasy as a journalist and as a dad and as a friend and as someone who knows those on the inside. But he's a professional footballer and he's a very, very good one. He's someone I've always thought before this is a decent person, a good character. Do I have to revisit that? I don't know. He did what he had to do to get what he wanted. And in many ways, guys, that's just an upshot of modern football and the money involved and the stakes there are at play. So this video wasn't intended to clear things up. It is what it is. It's nuanced. There's two sides to every story. It's multi-layered. So there you go. Tell me what you think below the line. I think there'll be a lot of comments on this and I'll welcome it and I'll try to read and reply to as many as possible. At the very end of this, hit like, comment and subscribe. Been a brilliant ride this summer. There's still loads more to come. I'm going to do a big article at the Daily Mail Sport tomorrow, delving into Newcastle's summer and where I think it's left them for the time being. And the link below the line, the inside story of the transfer story of the summer. Wow, so much to go at in that. But for now, goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me. We're not done yet. That is to Newcastle and Liverpool fans. Really, really appreciate the interaction. It's been brilliant. It's been fantastic. I hope I've done you guys justice as a journalist. Okay, see you soon. Bye-bye.